Hello and welcome to this Election 2013 special on Sky News. We spoke on this election eve earlier today to former Liberal Prime Minister John Howard, now to Labor's longest-serving Prime Minister Bob Hawke. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Doug.
Can I start by asking, how would you honestly describe the last 6 years of this Labor government?
A bloody mixed bag. I think history will be relatively kind to Julia in that no Prime Minister has operated in more difficult parliamentary circumstances than she did. And yet when you look at it, she got a lot of runs on the board and, in my judgment, a lot of good runs. I mean, without being exhaustive, I mean, just take Gonski and the National Disability Insurance Scheme. These are very significant reforms, and so I think while it is right, and I must be objective about it, to emphasise, to refer to the squabbling and so on, the lack of unity, that has been a feature of it, an unpleasant feature, a negative feature. But it is also worth remembering the good things, and of course there is no doubt that the action that Kevin took with his colleagues at the time of the global financial crisis did save Australia. The rest of the world went into recession, we didn't. And we were helped certainly by the continuing demand from China, but it required good economic management, and that was provided. And most of the other developed economies would give their eye teeth for the economic position of Australia. So, as I say, it's a mixed bag.
I don't want to dwell on the squabbling that went on over the last 6 years too much, but I know a lot of people would be very keen to hear what you, Bob Hawke, really think about the chopping and changing on the leadership. Was it a mistake to get rid of Kevin Rudd in the first place, and was it a mistake to then get rid of Julia Gillard?
Well, it's very difficult for someone outside the caucus because they are the ones who live with the leaders and know how they are performing in terms of the essential jobs of a leader, of keeping the party together and optimising their effort. And the position that they found themselves in as the period after the 2007 election was that they were increasingly unhappy with the way Kevin was operating. And of course there's elements of personal ambition in it, but I think there were probably, there were some genuine concerns about how it was going. So they took a big risk. Then Julia came in, and that was, as I say, a period which had its negatives, no doubt. But history will judge her kindly, I think, overall. But then when the polls were going so badly, I think I could understand they felt they had to make the decision they did. I don't think they were really madly happy about it, but it was a pragmatic decision, David.
But this revolving door leadership, it's not helped the image of the Labor
well,
brand,
of course, let's remember that this was the domain of the Liberals in the 1980s. Yeah. They were the party of the revolving leadership, and it didn't help them.
In opposition, though, not in government.
No, but still, it didn't help them either. I mean,
it kept them out of power for a long time.
No, it's a fact of political life that if you are continuously changing your leaders, by definition, that must reduce the degree of confidence that people have in the party.
How do you think this campaign's gone for Labor? Has it been a good campaign?
I don't think it'll go down as a great campaign. I thought the launch was a marvellous launch. It was one of the best launches there's been. Albo excelled himself in opening. I thought it was a really outstanding introduction. Then when Therese came on, I thought, is it going to be a bit mushy? No. But she hit all the right notes, I thought, in a personal sense. And Kevin then performed very well. It's a pity that hadn't happened earlier. And I think, in my judgment, it was a mistake that he didn't go much earlier. To
the election, you mean? Yeah.
If he'd gone pretty soon after he got the change of leadership and opened with a campaign like that, I think it might have had a different story.
Yeah. What have been the disappointments in the campaign?
Well, obviously you would have to put Thursday last week down as a disappointment, the handling of the material from the Treasury and the Department of Finance, to have a situation where the departmental heads come out and sort of repudiate
pretty embarrassing.
Political leader's statement is embarrassing. So I would have thought that was the sort of low point of the campaign.
What do you think is going to happen tomorrow?
Well, I've got to be objective about it. I know what I want to happen. I want to see Labor win. But I've always been, objective about these things. And if you look at all the polls, you'd have to say Labor's going to lose. But I urge all Labor workers to still work tonight. And
can you understand a lot of Labor supporters though feeling disillusioned as they go into the ballot box tomorrow?
Oh, yeah, sure. But they should also remember that through all this turbulent period that you've been talking about, core Labor values have been honoured. I mean, and this is on education. The historical record of the two parties in education is there's just no comparison. Labor has been a party of equity in education, Whitlam, and then what we did in increasing the participation rate. When I came to government in 1983, Australia had the lowest retention rate in the developed world. Less than 30% of our kids finished their secondary education. And we brought in these means-tested financial education assistance grants, and we lifted up to 70%. You look at the whole question of education, of expenditure on the actual education system and increasing the participation rate, saying that every kid is going to have an equal opportunity.
But see, a lot
of those things were central in this last period of government, and the Gonski reforms are a continuation of a great Labor tradition.
See, we've heard about this Labor tradition from Kevin Rudd a few times through the campaign. He points to your reform record, which is significant, things like floating the dollar, Medicare, superannuation, big reforms, we're still benefiting from today. Do you think the last 6 years of Labor in government has really been on that level?
Well, no, but they were remarkable. It would be very unlikely that you'll have anything like that again, in the sense that there were so many fundamental reforms that had to be undertaken after a generation of terrible conservative economic management. And we did those things. But within this period that we're talking about, the economic management of Kevin Rudd and Julia in the period of the global financial crisis was, by world standards, outstanding and is recognised internationally as such. So let's just dwell on the negatives. I mean, I think they have to be given credit for that while recognising the problems.
When we look at the challenges that are going to lie ahead for whoever wins tomorrow, both domestically and globally, what do you reckon are the big challenges that Australia is going to face?
Well, the world is changing rapidly, as we know, and I don't think you can overemphasise the importance of education. This is not just formal academic education, but technical and further education. And I think this is where Kevin Rudd is absolutely right in the latter stages of the campaign and emphasising the importance of that area. Because the industries of the future are not yet properly delineated. They will emerge. And our capacity as a nation to participate in those industries and excel in them and be competitive will depend fundamentally on the resources we commit to education in that area. So I think that is a fundamentally important challenge.
What about globally? When you look around the world, and Australia's place in the region of the Asia-Pacific and the world, and this has been a bit of an issue in the campaign. Kevin Rudd takes credit rightly for getting us onto the UN Security Council. How do you see Australia's role? Are we a middle power? Should we be a major player? Should we be a bit more realistic about our role?
We're a middle power. We're there at about the level of just how depending on how you calculate it, about 12th, 13th in the world in size of our economy. And we are able to point to a significant record in international events. I mean, going back to my period, we established APEC, which was and remains an important part of the institutional framework for cooperation between the countries of the region. We took the lead in bringing peace to Cambodia. We took a very leading role in those earlier years in promoting the trade talks to increase international trade liberalisation. We took the lead in the Commonwealth in the fight against apartheid, and it's recognised by the leaders in South Africa the role that we played. We saved the Antarctic from mining. Now, all those are not insignificant achievements. And we didn't do it by getting up and trumping and saying we're the best in the world. We intelligently cooperated with other countries. We tried to influence the major powers, but we assembled support from a range of medium-sized powers. And so Australia can point to the past and say, these things we've done, and there's no reason why we shouldn't continue without bombast and big noting, just in that quite effective way to do these things.
To be listened to, we have to be respected, don't we, on the world stage. What are things like Australia's treatment of asylum seekers do for our respect?
Yeah. Well, I can understand how people are concerned about asylum seeker policy on both sides. But I ask people to understand, this basic point, and that is that you have these murderous, bloody people smugglers. I say murderous because they know that in grabbing money from these people, a lot of them are certain to die at sea. Now, we just can't tolerate that situation where there is open slather for people murderers to get their money and send people on these sort of records. So something has been... My own view is that I would have if I'd been in a position, I would have right at the beginning tried to organise an international heads of government meeting of the countries in the region and tried to work out a cooperative solution to it that way. I think that's the way to go.
Are you comfortable with the current policy of...
Well, no one can be comfortable with a policy, and including the government. No one is saying, look, this is a beautiful solution, but they're saying it's a bloody difficult problem, and we're doing the best we can. I would like to see a situation after tomorrow, if Tony gets up, where he calls in the Labor Party and says, now let's work on this together. Let's have an Australian position. Let's cooperate. Because this is an issue which ought to be beyond party politics. If
Tony Abbott does win tomorrow, what sort of Prime Minister do you think he'll be?
It's a good question, David. I'd just make the opening point that I think a lot of the Labor Party in the last 12 months has made the mistake of underrating Tony. Tony has historically been capable of small gaffes, as his own people will tell you, and as he'll acknowledge himself, I think. But he's shown considerable discipline in this campaign, I think. As I say, I'm trying to be as objective as I can about it. I think there was the hope on the part of Labor that once the campaign going, there'd be some big Tony gaffes. Well, there haven't been big Tony gaffes. And so he remains in as according to the polls, a strong position. He will be in a position where if he has a large majority, he'll have a lot of authority. But if I can deign to give him advice...
I'm sure he'd listen.
Well, I think the essence of leadership is consultation. Not to say, look, I'm the big boss, I know what's best.
Which is the sort of cabinet you ran.
Yeah.
It was a proper cabinet government.
Yeah, well, I called my whole cabinet, the whole ministry together as soon as we were elected. And I said to them, there's only two circumstances in which I'm going to get involved in your portfolio. One is if you ask me, and two, if something arises in your portfolio which has a whole of government implication. Other than that, you're on your own. And this is not rocket science, David. I mean, it's just plain garden common sense. That if you're going to get the best out of people, you consult with them and then give them a free hand. And, my advice to Tony would be is that I think that's the best way to go.
What about things like when you become Prime Minister for the first time, and, you know, thinking back to you in 1983, it's often said opposition leaders don't have the foreign policy experience, they don't have the experience on this or that, but particularly on national security matters. How do you get your head across all of that and suddenly become comfortable on that stage?
Well, I was in the fortunate position where as President of the ACTU and being on the International Labour Organisation executive, I had a lot of international experience, so dealing internationally was not new for me. But the basic answer to your question is just hard work. I mean, we are terribly fortunate in this country in having a very, very good quality public service, too often derided and not often enough acknowledged for their merit. You have, through those public servants and your security services and your defence forces, you have a fund of information. And I just made it a point, as soon as I got into the position, to devour the memos and information that was available. And I suggested, you know, that's what Tony will do.
Given you've got this public service, you know, Department of Foreign Affairs and the Prime Minister's department around you, are you nervous at all about what Tony Abbott could do on the international stage?
I just hope that as part of the, you know, budgetary sort of saving situation, I hope it's not a slash and burn approach to the public service. It's just too easily to deride public servants, and we don't often enough, as I say, acknowledge the fundamentally important work they do in protecting you know, the Australian people.
It's a good point. You don't often hear people speaking up in defence of bureaucrats.
No, but they should, because they are, as I say, fundamentally important to ensuring that legislation is given effect to. Government say we're going to do this for the people, but it has to be implemented. And my experience was that we had a very, very good public service, dedicated, committed, and I think it should be recognised. And I just hope that Tony understands that and doesn't engage in a reckless process of, you know, really emasculating the public service. That would be a disaster. I don't think he will. I certainly hope he doesn't.
When we contemplate what happens after tomorrow, if Labor is in opposition, which direction should it go in? Who should lead it?
Well, that is a matter for caucus, and I don't think it's appropriate for me publicly to go to that issue. The people that are being talked about, obviously Bill Shorten. His name, I think, comes ahead of the list in terms of those who've talked about it. Greg Combay was obviously talked about, but Greg, who had a lot of talent, is gone. There's Chris Bowen, of course, a man of very considerable talent.
He's got to hang on to his seat.
He's got to hang on to his seat. I think Tana Plibersek, I don't think she's a candidate for leadership. She has a 3-year-old child, but she could be a candidate for the deputy. I think Tana is a very, very impressive representative. She's intelligent. She's proved herself a capable minister. Presents very well. But that's, I think, the most that Tanya would be interested in would be, as I say, deputy. There's Tony Burke. I don't know whether he'd be a candidate or not, but, you know, on all the indications that they stand now, you would think that Bill's got the front running.
I know you didn't list Kevin Rudd there as an opposition leader for Labor.
I've assumed that we're talking in a scenario, which I don't like to do, but talking in a scenario reflected by the polls, in which there's going to be a really bad result. And if in that situation, I think Kevin himself would understand that that there would be a change.
Are you?
On the other hand, I mean, if he win, and but B, if he were to produce a result which was not a win, but saved most of the furniture, well, there wouldn't be any question of change.
Are you a supporter of the changes that he's put through at least the caucus anyway, and that is to have the membership given a say in who the leader should be?
I think the concept of involving the membership in these things is good. Yes, I support the concept. and it's worked in other countries. The UK does it. And why shouldn't the membership have a say with the caucus? The caucus has to have a loaded portion, but the general membership should have.
The criticism has been that it's under these rules it's too hard to get rid of a dud leader. In opposition, the rule would be you'd have to have 60% of caucus wanting to get rid of the leader. Is that a problem?
Well, I think after the experience of the last 6 years, the party would see virtue in a situation where it's not easy to get rid of a leader.
Well, no, it never is it? But you don't fear that this could mean whoever takes the leadership is ultimately going to be there at the next election, even if they turn out to be a dud with the voters?
Well, it wouldn't be impossible to change the leadership.
As for the future of the Labor Party, though, part of the reason for doing this is to deal with the dwindling membership base. Does Labor need to make itself more relevant to the voters beyond the traditional union base?
Well, you've got to remember that they have consistently been much more widely relevant. I mean, just look at the facts. Education. Which party has produced equity and equality of opportunity into the total education system? Labor. The Conservatives just neglected education and produced a situation where, compared to the rest of the world, we were in a pathetic situation. Education is nothing more fundamental to the whole range of the people than equality of opportunity, so that the kids of every parent, irrespective of the size of dad or mum's wallet, are going to have an equal opportunity. Now, nothing can be more relevant beyond the trade union to everyone than that. Health. Do you remember, you would have been just a kid, but do you remember that before Medicare, the prospect of illness and hospitalisation represented a financial disaster for Australians, for so many Australians? Now, it was Labor that transformed that situation.
The thing is, people like me have probably grown up with it. We're used to it. We don't give Labor too much credit for it.
Well, it was Labor, and the bloody Tories fought us tooth and nail. Gough brought the concept in first with Medibank, and finally got in 1975, but it was only operated for a couple of months before they had the... And they'd fought us in concept when we were trying to bring it in, and then once they came in, they destroyed it. Now, I just ask your listeners, in response to your question about Labor being relevant to the people, how can you be more relevant than being the party that has looked after the people in education and health?
But I guess the point is, when people look at the Labor Party and they see the extent of union influence, both at the conference and in the parliamentary party, they think, well, is that really relevant to me?
What's relevant to the ordinary voter, your listener, is what are the basic values of the party? Now, I just go back to these basic issues of health and education. The values of Labor, in terms of the interests of your viewers, the ordinary population, the values of Labor are there in their interest.
Should Kevin Rudd have been hammering some of these values more?
Well, I haven't followed every speech he's been making. I assume he's been talking about it a fair bit. He certainly should have been.
Just finishing on this point, how would you describe Kevin Rudd, the person, the man?
Well, I haven't over the years been close to him, so I can't speak with any authority of long detail. No. He is obviously an intelligent bloke, very committed. I think as he has conceded in his period as Prime Minister, he probably didn't consult as much as he should have, but I think he's learnt from that lesson. But there's no doubt about the man's ability and his commitment.
But in terms of since he came back to the job, a couple of months ago now, has he shown enough of the change that was necessary from first time around?
Well, there's been some sign of it, but you've also got to say that, of course, in a physically fast-moving election campaign, it's fairly difficult to have a continuing process of consultation, and he's been with Bruce Hawke, who's got a lot of experience. I think it's pretty hard to make a judgment against Kevin on the basis of this short period of, he didn't have time to be gathering cabinets together and policy committees together and so on. Very fast moving. But I'm sure that if he were to win, that he would, as Prime Minister in that situation, be much more consultative than he was in the first time round.
Well, we'll see what happens when the people of Australia have their say tomorrow. Former Prime Minister Bob Hawke, great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
Cheers.